Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuttapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saritam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Reva Prenava Bhakti Shasya Vitati Sanjivani Swagama Rambe Kamata Partudaha Damani Vishwa Pugolasini Duran Me Marushaki Nopi Sarasi Bhavaya Bhuyat Prabhu Shri Chaitanya Kripa Nirankusha Maha Madhurya Kadambini Aryon Tat Sat. So continuing our little reading of Madhurya Kadambini. Let me share the screen here. So Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is told that yes, we've heard about Shraddha, Sadhu Sangha, and then Anishrita Bhajan Kriya. He started his discussion on Anartha Nivritti. He said there are 4 categories of anarthas. There are anarthas that are produced from sin and piety, which basically means the anarthas that come from being afflicted with the 5 kleshas, avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha. Then there are anarthas that come from aparad, aparada uta anartha. So that's what he's discussing here. He says that aparada uta anartha means the aparads that come from nam-aparad. So having said that, he begins to discuss the nam-aparads specifically. Of course, na-aparad happens unconsciously. In the case of unconscious acts of na-aparad, then simply by one's continuous bhajan of the holy name, etc., accompanied with the other angas of bhakti, then one gradually will destroy those anarthas and attain the stage of nishta. But in cases where anartha has happened consciously, then one has to consciously address them, basically. So with that understanding, he's began a discussion of the aparads one by one. Actually, I don't think he covers all 10 of the anarthas, but he at least covers the first 4 or 5. And then he requests us to use our devotional intuition to fill out the rest of the approach to the other anarthas. In any case, he started with the sadhu ninda. So he discussed sadhu ninda, which basically means doing kirtan of the faults of devotees. Those faults may be empirically true, but if you shall do kirtan of their faults, in the public assembly especially, then is ninda. And as a result of the Vaishnava ninda, one commits na-aparad, you can't make advancement. So if this na-aparad has taken place, then one has to approach that sadhu, do stuti, means glorification, offer obeisances, and seek his blessings with repentance inside the heart. If there's no repentance, there is no nullification of this anartha. There has to be actual repentance. If the Vaishnava is not pacified, then you shall try for many days, bahudinam, to serve him and please him in various ways, him, her. If still the Vaishnava is not satisfied, then you should understand that basically we're more or less creatures of hell. We're destined for hell. And in that spirit of repentance, we should give up all their activities and simply do Nam Sankirtan. And in this way, we may be forgiven from such a transgression. That was basically, I think, what we discussed. I summarized it there. He ends he goes on to say that one should not think because sadhus are advanced and see with equal vision that there is no aparad really. There's no question of seeking forgiveness from them because they're not even taking it as offense. In such cases, we were informed that the dust of the Vaishnava's feet will destroy us. Or Krishna himself, takes offense. Whether or not the Vaishnava takes offense is irrelevant. Krishna himself takes offense, like in the pastime with Ambarish Maharaj, when Durvas Muni is being informed by Vishnu that Vishnu cannot save him from the chakra. Aham Bhakta Paradino, Yaswa Tantra Ibaduja. So Narayana is telling that he is a Swatantra Iba. It is like he has no independence because he is completely bound by the love of his devotee, Bhakta Paradina. Pavanya Rashanaya Dritangri Padma. So Bhavati Bhagavata Pradhana Ukta. The chief devotee, Bhagavat Pradhan, the highly advanced devotee is one who has been able to tie up the feet of the Lord with the ropes of love. Pranaya Rashanaya Dritangri Padma. So the Lord is like having no independence. The word is used Eva, Swatantra Eva, like he has no independence. He's still the independent Lord, but it's like he has no independence. And then later on in that sequence, Narayana goes on to say, what is that? Sadhavo Hridaya Mahyam, that the sadhu is my heart and I am the heart of the sadhu. So Prabhupada makes a nice comment and his purport there that with this verse, we are to understand that Durvas Muni's attack of Ambarish Maharaj means that he wanted to give pain to the heart of the Lord. So even if you say, the devotee himself is not offended, like Ambarish Maharaj, he wasn't offended by Durvas Muni. Still, it is understood that he directly attacked the heart of the Lord. So the Lord doesn't like that. He takes offense. So one should not think, the sadhu is equipoise. He'll not, no. So in cases of offense, one thing that happens, so this is the last part of this sadhu ninda. I should have covered it last time, but anyway, kind of time ran out and I didn't cover it. So he ends his discussion of sadhu ninda with this last point about sadhu's mercy coming in the case of offenders, especially. I was specifically reminded of a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. We've quoted it so many times, we must be knowing it by now. Vavapravargo brahmato yadhabhavech dhanashataryachuta satsamangam. So the living entity is wandering around the cosmos, and when his time for bhava apravarga, liberation from material existence, has arrived, then at that time he gets sadhu sangha, janashataryachuta satsamangama. And when he gets sadhu sangha, satsangama yarhi, at the time when he gets sadhu sangha, tada eva, precisely at that time, paravareshe tvayi jayate mati, precisely at that time, there awakens mati. Jayate mati means mati is awakened or born. Mati for the Supreme Lord, para vareshe. He becomes Krishna conscious precisely at that moment. So it is saying that doesn't always happen. People get sadhu sangha. That means right when you get sadhu sangha, then right at that moment you become Krishna conscious. It means mati of the Lord is awakened in one's psyche. Sagato, because the sadhus are having only God as their goal, Sagato, or the sadhu is one through whom the Lord's mercy is coming. So both explanations are given by acharyas. So in either case, you become kind of aware of God. But it is not seen in all cases that this happens. So Jiva Goswami explaining on this is that if there is some aparad, then you will neglect sadhus, there'll be tendency towards negligence and disrespect, or you will just see them as an ordinary person. So in those cases where you have such a vision, then you need the sadhu's grace to remove the defect of the aparad. Because as we discussed last class also, at the heart of aparad is saying the spiritual thing is material. That's at the heart of aparad. So you see the sadhu is normal. Jiva Goswami writes in the Bhakti Sandarbha, I think this is like Anucheta 179 or 180. I think it's 179. And he writes that if persons are like simple-minded people, then when they get sadhu sangha, even if they are like negligent, it means that they don't do sadhu sangha with like refinement. But they're very simple people, and they hear from sadhus, they see their kirtan, they will immediately accept this is a great person. And you can kind of see this in India. You see it everywhere, honestly, but particularly in India, when it comes to sadhus, sangha, when you see like these village people, they're very simple. Even if you go to, I have experience when I went to a Maharashtrian village when I first visited India. And just because you wear saffron, what to speak of other things, just because you wear saffron, they would offer obeisances, they would treat you with deference, and they would accept what you say. Even I was just like, God, when I went to India first time, I must have been 20, let's see, 18, 19, 20, 21. Yeah, I think I was like 21 or 22 when I first went to India. So I'm just like some young upstart that just joined, literally doing all sorts of nonsense just 4 years before. But in the village, they were accepting me as sadhu because I had saffron on. When I would speak, they would hear attentively taking the notes. So they're a simple person they will treat with like this deference. They will accept this is a great person. A little, so even though they may not know how to do sadhu sangha with refinement, they accept. But there are others, they have some offense maybe there, something is there that causes them to be negligent or disrespectful, or just see like, oh, maybe some pious person, whatever. So that's in cases where that vision is coming up due to aparad, then you specifically need sadhu's mercy to remove the defect. So Jiva Goswami making this point there in Bhakti Sandarbha. So Jiva Goswami gives examples, and examples he gives are the same examples that are being given here by Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, where some offense has been done in order to remove the defect. Some offense has been done, and in order to remove the defect, you specifically need the sadhu's grace. So he gives the example here of King Rahugana, you know from 5th canto. King Rahugana employed Jada Bharata because he was looking very strong, but he was just like lost in ecstasy, but moving around, there no clothes on. They employed him to carry the king's palanquin, seeing him as just some Shudra ignorant fellow. So that was an offense. And then later, Jadabar enlightened Maharaj Rahugana. He gave him mercy. And Rahugana realized his offense and sought shelter from him. That's one example. The other example given here by Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also Jiva Goswami is Upari Vasu. What is it? Is it here? I'm gonna read it here. Upari Charu Vasu. So apparently there was one king there. This is mentioned in the Sandarbha. There was one king was there. He fought for the Devatas against the demons, Daityas. But later on, feeling repentant for having killed so many demons, he decided to go to Patala Loka to meditate on the Lord in Samadhi. So the demons got word that Upari Charuvasu has come to Patala Loka. So they went there to kill him. As they were just about to kill him, they raised their arms with weapons in hand to strike him. But due to his meditation, they were not able to move their arm. Their arms got stuck there. So they realized by the power of his samadhi, they were not able to make any attack and kill him to take the revenge. So they went to Shukracharya. Shukracharya says, okay, because of his meditation, then you won't be able to do anything, his meditation on Vishnu. So you go and start speaking atheistic philosophy. You speak atheistic philosophy very loudly in his ear. And by hearing all the atheism, so many doubts will come and his bhajan will slacken, right? If you hear atheism, atheism will be filled with so many offenses to the Lord also. So if you hear that, then your bhakti will slacken, right? We also heard about that being one of the 5 deep effects of aparad, the bhakti shaitulya, your how you say, bhakti will slacken. So you go and preach atheism, the doubts will come inside, and then his meditation will slacken, then you'll be able to attack and kill him. So they started preaching atheistic philosophy to him very loudly. And Upadi Charuvasu was feeling very merciful to them, like, how they're making so much effort to offend Bhagavan just so they can kill me. So he prayed to the Lord that they be rescued, that they be saved. And in that way, they all became devotees. So this story is also told in Sundarbas. And I think another example was given, I can't recall. I'm just going to read here from the slide. You can see, sometimes one commits an offense to a Mahabhagavata, but due to the Mahabhagavata's quality of forgiveness, he does not become angry with the offender. Still, for his rectification, the offender should ask for forgiveness by paying obeisance to his lotus feet and serve him for his own pleasure. Oh, this is the wrong thing. I actually posted the wrong thing. I don't know how this one, and I can pull it up. Anyway, these 3 examples are given. This was not the right thing. That's why I couldn't find it. Okay, so that's the closing of Sadhu Ninda. If you really want to see that other statement, just remind me at the end of class. I'll just post it. This was actually the wrong thing. Okay, so that's how he covers Sadhu Ninda. So if you have any further questions, you can put it in the chat box, but let's move on to the second aparad. So this is the second aparad mentioned in the Padma Purana. Shivasa Shri Vishnur Yarihaguna Namadi Sakalamdiya Vinam Pashet Sa Kaluharina Mahitakara. So if one considers the name, qualities, and such of Mahadev and Vishnu as different, then it is an offense. Or considering the all-auspicious name, form, qualities, and activities of Lord Vishnu as different from his eternal personality is an offense. So this offense has 2 explanations. So Binam Pashet, oops, you see this word. That means to see difference. So what is the difference? You see, well, Diya means the mundane intelligence. So applying the mundane intelligence, you see difference between Shivasya Sri Vishnu. So Shiva and Sri Vishnu. So to see difference between them, Yarihaguna Namhadi Sakalamdiya. See difference between their qualities, their name, etc. If you see difference between Vishnu and Shiva, that is considered non-aparad. To see difference means the way that our commentators describe it. Well, we'll see it also elaborated on here by Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. But the way our commentators basically describe it is to see difference means you see that Vishnu is one Lord and Shiva is another Lord. So there's 2 independent lords. That's how you see like this, that there's 2 independent lords. So this is a fault of there being many lords. And then if you have the idea that there are many absolute truths, if you have the idea that there's more than one absolute truth, then how can your bhajan become exclusive? There will be first this absolute truth, and I'm not satisfied with that one, then I'll go to some other absolute truth. So this, if you see distinction that Vishnu is one sort of reality, and Shiva is another ontological reality, absolute truth. So to see that difference, that is aparad. Or the word Shivasa, which means auspicious, is just taken as a qualifier of Sri Vishnu. So you see the auspicious qualities and names, etc., of Vishnu as different from himself. Because in the material world, the substance and the quality have difference. For example, the word apple and the apple, they are existing differently. Your hunger cannot be quelled from saying apple, apple, apple. Because the substance apple and the word apple, nam, which is usually just indicating the substance, is different. So if you take the holy name, for example, to be like that the name is just an indicator of the absolute truth, but ultimately different from that which is indicating, then that's an aparad. And they have non-difference. Nama Chintamani Krishna Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha Purna Shuddha Nityamukta Abhinatva Namanamino. They have non-difference. There's no difference there. By chanting holy name, you are associated with the Supreme Lord. So if one thinks in that way, that is also non-aparad. So this is the two meanings of the second aparad mentioned in Papa Purana. So let's look how Shiva Shanat unpacks this. Is a little interesting, kind of technical, a little hard to follow also. So this is how he unpacks it. He says, first of all, there are two types of Chaitanya. Chaitanya means conscious entities. So there are two types. One type is called as independent Chaitanya or Ishvara Chaitanya, and the other is called Jiva Chaitanya. All right, these are the two types of conscious entities. Ishvara Chaitanya, that means they have independence, and the Jiva Chaitanya. Okay, the difference between Ishvara Chaitanya and Jiva Chaitanya is that the Ishvara Chaitanya is all pervading, and the Jiva Chaitanya pervades only his tabernacle. The word tabernacle here refers to the body. So his consciousness only pervades that far. Whereas the Ishvara Chaitanya, he's all pervading. Okay. And also the Jiva Chaitanya is the Shakti of the Lord, whose existence is controlled by him. So this is the distinction between the two. So now he wants to describe the Ishvara Chaitanya, and he further categorizes. So he says the Ishvara Chaitanya is of two types. One type is Maya Sparsha Rahitam, which means devoid of the touch of Maya, or devoid of contact with Maya. And the other is Maya Sparsha, touching Maya or accepting contact with Maya. So the example of Maya Sparsha Rahitam, one who is devoid of contact with Maya, is Lord Narayana, for example, basically Vishnu Tattva. Not even all Vishnu Tattva, Narayana in the spiritual sky and the different forms of the God in the spiritual sky, they are without touch of Maya, Maya Sparsha Rahitam. And the other type is accepting contact with Maya, so that is Shiva Tattva. So Shiva is accepting some touch of Maya. And Narayana, etc., these forms, they're not accepting any touch. So this is the difference. So this section of the Bhagavatam is quoted, 10th canto, chapter 88. This is a chapter where it describes the slaying of the Vrikasura demon who requested from Shiva the boon that whomever's head he touched would explode into 1,000 pieces or something of the sorts. So the way that chapter opens, as you know, is Parikshit Maharaj having this inquiry about how it is that Shiva, although, lives in a crematorium, is completely renounced, those who worship him in the material world have many opulences. Whereas Lord Narayana is the husband of goddess Shri. He's the husband of the goddess of fortune. And yet those who worship him are devoid of opulences. It is saying that they don't have many opulences there. So in answering this question, Sri Shukamuni, he gives different, he explains the tattva of Shiva, briefly explains the tattva of Shiva and Lord Narayana. And speaking of Lord Narayana, he says this thing. This is a very famous verse. Oh, you probably can't see this. Hare hi nirguna saksha purusha pakriti para. Sasarvadrik upadrashta tam bhaja nirguno bhavet. So first thing he says is Lord Hari is nirguna. So he has no connection with the material modes of nature. He is the supreme personality of Godhead, all-seeing eternal witness, who is transcendental to material nature. So is, Purusha Pakriti Para, he is beyond Pakriti. He is the Purusha who is beyond Pakriti. Sarvadrik, he's the seer of everything. Upadrashta, the witness of everything. So Tam Bhajan Nirguno Bhavat. So those who do his bhajan, they also become Nirguna Bhavat. So basically the idea here is that the opulences of those who worship Shiva are composed of the gunas of nature. Whereas the opulences of those who worship Narayana are nirguna. Their opulence is nirguna, so that means you may not be able to see it in terms of the, the gunas. In other words, when we look for opulences in the material world, we're looking at the opulences that are composed of the gunas. Our eyes don't have the ability to see their nirguna opulence. So those who worship Hari, he is nirguna. So the wealth that he gives them is also nirguna. So that means you cannot see their wealth. Even the devotee himself may not be able to see the wealth that he is getting from Hari. As you know, as these verses continue, this very famous verse appears. Yasyaham nigrin nami Hari shetatadam shanai. Just a few verses later, where it says when Hari is giving his mercy, then he gradually takes everything away from his devotee, and devotee suffers. And his suffering, all his suffering means because he's devoid of the material opulences. That is the suffering there. And it's because he's devoid of the material opulences, the relationships that are based on material resources are also destroyed. In the material world, most of the relationships are based on the material resources. So if you remove the material resources, that people don't want to have anything to do with you. So when you do Hari Bhajan and he removes the material resources, so everyone doesn't like you anymore. And he suffers, the person suffers in this way. And his suffering condition, Krishna goes on to say, he gets sadhu sangha. And in that sadhu sangha, he develops bhakti very nicely without obstacles. These verses are coming, you can see 8, 9, and 10, very nice. So if you do Hari Bhajan, you become nirguna. So this Aishwarya Chaitanya is Maya Sparsha Radhita. He is devoid of contact with Maya. So if you worship him, you also become devoid of contact with the products of Maya and eventually become devoid of contact with Maya yourself. You become transcendental. Okay, that is Narayana Tattva, Ishvara Chaitanya Tattva of that type. But then Shiva Tattva is mentioned. So this is another verse where Shukadeva Goswami is speaking, describing Shiva Tattva. So he says, Shiva Shakti Yuta Shashvat Trilinga Gunasambrita Vaikarikas Taijasascha Tamashash Chaitya Trida. So Lord Shiva is always united with his Shakti. Shiva Shakti Yuta Shashvat. He is always connected with the Shakti. That means Prakriti here. For this reason, he is called Trilinga. And the word linga means like sign or indicator. Or Trilinga, one who is manifesting 3 divisions. Gunasambrita, because he is covered by the gunas. What are those gunas? By Karikas, Taijasascha, Tamashas. This means Sattva Guna, Rajaguna, and Tamaguna. So Chaitya Trida, the threefold Aham means Ahankar principle. He's the deity of the Ahankar principle. So the Ahankar principle is having these 3 divisions. And so he is also having these 3 divisions as the presiding deity of the Ahankar, Trilinga Gunasamrita. So anyway, he is Gunasamrita. So Gunasamrita means, it actually means covered by the gunas. But so the Jivas, we are also covered by the gunas. So you say this Shiva is also covered by the gunas. So the difference here is that we are covered by the gunas and we are bewildered by her. We already described this the other day. Whereas when Shiva is entering Maya Sparsha, accepting association with the gunas, it is by his own will. And therefore he is not covered by the gunas. Cover here means not diluted by them, although accepting some association with them. So one other point he mentions here about this is that this ability of Shiva is a derivative principle. In other words, he's not an independent Chaitanya in his own right, by his own power, or rather his position as Ishvara Chaitanya is an effect whose cause is Lord Govinda. So I should pull this verse up also. Oh, I don't think you can see my verses, right? I should probably, because I'm using the database here. So if you go to Brahmasamhita, so this verse is also quoted by Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, then we'll just read it. So you go to Brahmasamhita, verse 45, 545, only 1 chapter is there. So this verse is there. let me share the screen. Share screen. No, okay. Now I'll do this one. So then I can. Yeah, this one. I think you can see it now. So just as milk is transformed into curd by the actions of acid, but yet the effect curd is neither same as nor different from its cause, namely milk. So I adore the primeval Lord Govinda, of whom the state of Shambhu is a transformation for the performance of the work of destruction. So this verse is basically showing how Lord Shiva is a, quote, transformation of Vishnu. In the commentary of Jiva Goswami to this verse, he says that this transformation part should not be accepted because, as we know, consciousness cannot have any vikara in it. It cannot transform from one thing to another thing. So that part is not accepted, but the analogy is meant to show cause and effect. Yogurt comes from milk, not that milk comes from yogurt. So in the same way, Shiva is coming from Vishnu and not the other way around. So the idea is that he is Aishwarya Chaitanya. That's why he's quoting this. The idea he's in the category of Aishwarya Chaitanya, but his position as Aishwarya Chaitanya is derivative from its source, which is Govinda, Adi Purusham Tamaham Vijaya. He is not a separate, independent Lord. So that's why this Navarat is saying, if you see them as separate, and both are milk only, then that will be an aparat. But to understand Shiva is also Aishwarya Chaitanya, but that position is derivative. That is proper understanding. In that way, no non-aparat occurs in that particular case. So this is how he wants to develop this topic. That's me summarizing everything there. I'm gonna just go on because reading it might take too much time. So many Puranas and other scriptures describe Shiva as Ishvara. So if you go to many scriptures, therefore there's so much Shiva Bhakti in India. So if you go, because there's a lot of glorification of Shiva in Shastra, and also glorification of him as supreme. But the Srimad Bhagavatam, of course, is accepted as the, the crest jewel of all Purmanas, Purmana Shiromani. It is the crest jewel of all Puranas. So it is Bhagavad Purana say. So here, one verse is quoted from the second chapter of the first canto. The Lord here means a Parama Purusha, the Supreme Purusha. He accepts the form of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva for creation, maintenance, and destruction of the universe. So the idea here is that Shiva is, again, positioned as the Ishvara is coming from, the Parama Purusha, and not the other way around. That's why this verse is quoted. So many Shastras may glorify Shiva, even glorify him as God. But what does Bhagavad Purana say? So Bhagavad Purana is the crest jewel of all Purmanas. So we have to see what that is saying. So Bhagavatam says like this. So his, again, basically a Pramana saying that his Ishvara Chaitanya position is derivative. Okay, so from this shloka, it is generally understood that Brahma is also Ishvara Tattva, right? So from this verse, from the second chapter of the first canto, it's saying that Parama Purusha is accepting Shiva and Brahma, of course, and Vishnu. That's how he's contacting Maya. So if we're taking this verse as Pramana, then Brahma is also Ishvara Tattva. So Shiva Srinad wants to explain this point. He says here, speaking of Lord Brahma, he may be considered as such in the way that he is empowered by the Lord's specific energy for creation. The Brahmasamhita says, as the sun manifests some portion of its light in the stone, Surya Kantamani, similarly, being empowered by the Lord's energy, Brahma creates this universe. So there's one jewel, I guess, called Surya Kantamani. Not I guess, I accept, I've never seen it. Surya Kantamani has the ability to reflect the sunlight very powerfully. So much so that it's extremely hot. It can light things on fire and so on, just by the sun contacting it. So in the same way, the idea here is that Lord Brahma, he is a Jiva. He's actually not in the category Ishvara. We'll just see in a second. He's actually in the category of Jiva Chaitanya. But he's Jiva Chaitanya that is empowered by a particular Shakti of Bhagavan. And so Because of that empowerment, he is also called as Guna Avatar, or in this verse, the Padma Purusha is accepting the position. So the non-difference is because he's been invested with a particular power, but not because he is Ishvara Chaitanya. That's what he wants to say here. So he's going to explain this a little bit more. So carrying on here, Srimad Bhagavatam says smoke is superior to wood, a transformation of the earth. Fire, the base of sacrifices prescribed in the Vedas, is superior to smoke. Similarly, Rajaguna is superior to Tamaguna, and Sattaguna is superior to Rajaguna. One can realize Brahman by Sattaguna. So this is the verse that comes right after the Supreme Lord accepting these three positions for maintenance and so on. So they want to show how only by worshiping Vishnu can you get the Shreyamsi. That was the word used in 1.2.22. Shreyamsi means the ultimate good, Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. And for Bhaktas, of course, Purushartha Shiromani, Prema. That can only come by bhajan to Vishnu, to Krishna. So this verse 1.2.23 wants to show that by analogy. So you have wood, smoke, and fire. So wood is compared to Tamaguna, smoke is compared to Rajaguna, and fire is compared to Sattaguna. So when doing Vedic Yagya, in order to do Vedic Yagya, you need to have fire. But wood is also there, smoke also comes up. But ultimately, to do the Yagya, you need fire. So similarly, in order to get Shreyamsi, the ultimate good, there has to be Vishnu worship. That's kind of what the analogy wants to demonstrate. So here, Shiva, who's considered in the verse to be related to Tamagun, the destructive quality of nature, is compared to wood or the Tamagun. And Lord Brahma, who's related to the creative potency of material nature, is compared to Rajagun. So just like smoke is moving, so the Rajas is there. And the wood is not moving, it's just like a lump. So it's compared to Tamagun. So from this logic, taking from this analogy, it will be understood that Lord Brahma is superior to Shiva, and of course Vishnu is superior to them all, if we're taking this analogy as pramana. So Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur wants to explain this because, again, it is understood that Shiva is Ishvara Chaitanya, that means he's in a superior ontological category, and Brahma is in an inferior one. Inferior, that word inferior is not the best word, a subordinate one. That is a little bit of a better word. So, but with this pramana there, it seems like Brahma's in a superior position. So how to reconcile? So he says this thing here. So this verse establishes the superiority of Rajagun over Tamagun, right? However, the realization of the Lord representing pure effulgence is not possible in Rajaguna, which is being compared here to smoke, right? So that we've already tried to explain. Representing pure effulgence, the Lord can be realized by Sattva-guna, which is like a burning fire. Obviously, this is not the material Sattva-guna, it's an analogy. God can only be realized by Shuddha Sattva, Bhakti Aham Vijananti Yavanyaschasmi Tatata. But this Sattva-guna, this is being used as an analogy here. Fire is pure effulgence, the Lord is pure effulgence. So from him only can this pure reality be realized. Okay, well, what about the doubt about Brahma and Shiva's ontological position? So he says this thing. In Tamagun, which is compared to wood, one gets a subtle realization of the Lord. What? As in the state of Sushupti, deep sleep, an effect of Tamagun, one gets the same bliss as if in the realization of Nirbheda Gyan, knowledge of oneness of Jiva and non-personal Brahman. One should ascertain the truth by considering the facts in this particular way. So what he wants to say here, what he's trying to explain here is that Shiva is in a superior ontological category than Brahma. That's what he's trying to explain. So he's making a comparison. Well, if Shiva is compared to Tamagun in the verse and Brahma to Rajagun, so Brahma should be in a superior position. So he wants to say that in wood, there is fire, right? There isn't any fire in the smoke, right? Of course, smoke is having some heat in it, but there is no fire in the smoke. But in wood, there's fire in a potential form, in a subtle way, right? Everyone, at least in Vedic culture, we all accept that there's fires in the wood. So in the same way, he wants to say that inside, you could say Lord Shiva is realization of the Godhead, or Aishwarya Chaitanya. That's what he wants to say. So he's giving an analogy here, which you would have to know Yoga Shastra a little bit to understand this, but we've talked about this in our classes many times over, that when you go into deep sleep, so there's Jagrat, means waking life, there's Swapna, which means sleeping with dreams, and then there's Susupti, where it's just, no dreamless sleep, or we call it as deep sleep. So in that deep sleep, basically the idea is that tamagun is so heavy in deep sleep that you're literally aware of nothing. You're aware that you're not aware of anything, essentially. Whereas when you're dreaming, swapna, you're aware of the dream world and you get absorbed in that like you do in waking life. But in deep sleep, you're aware that you're not aware of anything because tamagun is so dense. So in that state is often compared to what it's like to experience samadhi. The difference being in samadhi, you're informed by a high level of sattva guna, whereas in deep sleep, there is intense tamaguna. But in both states, there's basically awareness of the I without its connection to any content. You can say the am principle. There's awareness of the I without its connection to the am. That's a ghetto way of saying, usually when we think of self-identity, we think I am ... But if you can take away the am part, whenever comes after it, then you're just left with the pure I. So that pure I existence is inherent to the jiva. So that's all that you're aware of, the pure I without its connection to any content. And that happens in deep sleep, and it also happens in samadhi. So in that way, you experience Jivananda. So Jivananda is the Ananda that you experience from just being aware of the I without its connection to any content. That's why people who suffer a lot in the material world, they like to sleep a lot. They want to go into tamagun so you can get some respite from the suffering of the material world, isn't it? If you sleep, sometimes you're in such anxiety about things and you sleep and you dream about your anxieties. So then you don't get good sleep. But if you can go into deep sleep, then you get good sleep because it's just the I principle without its contact with anything. That's called Jivananda. So in the same way, he's saying, just as there's fire in this wood, but it is not in the smoke. So there's a subtle realization of the supreme Purusha in Shiva and not in Brahma. This is just, anyway, the point he's trying to make is that Shiva is Aishwarya Chaitanya, Lord Brahma is not. That's the point that he's making. So he's giving this as analogy. Okay, a few more slides here. So that's the Aishwarya Chaitanya category. Now he wants to describe the Jiva Chaitanya category. Okay, so he says the Jiva Chaitanya category is of two types. One type is called avrita, which means covered, and the other type is called anavrita, uncovered. So the covered is like, the regular jivas. They identify with their bodies as demigods, as animals, as this and that. And they're called as avrita Jiva Chaitanya. Then there's the anavrita Chaitanya, Jiva Chaitanya. They're uncovered. So they have two categories also. So one category is called Aishwarya Shakti Avishtam. So Aishwarya Shakti Avishtam means where Aishwarya Shakti, like the potency of God, basically, has entered inside. And the other is called as Aishwarya Shakti Anavishtam, where that Aishwarya Shakti has not entered. So when describing the jivas in whom that Aishwarya Shakti has not entered, he says they're basically of two types. Those who do Gyan Sadhana and those who do Bhakti Sadhana. So those who do Gyan Sadhana, they eventually realize merging with the Supreme. So he says their thing is shocham. He says their thing is suffering. Their process, of course, is suffering. There's a lot of austerity through Gyan Sadhana. And also their goal is suffering. Of course, this is the bhakti mood. Their goal is suffering because you can't really taste any bliss in Brahman. Because the whole idea of Brahman principle is that the enjoyer, the enjoyed and the enjoyable thing are merged into one category. so that you cannot taste any sweetness there. So bhaktas, we consider this as shocham, this is miserable. Better to go to hell. Better to covet going to hell than to covet such sorts of things. That's why he calls it a shocham. He says, if you do bhakti sadhana though, bhakti sadhana itself is pleasing. Susukam, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, susukam kartun. Bhakti sadhana is itself pleasing because it allows you to engage your senses in so many variegated ways. That's one part of it. And its goal is also very sweet. He says the goal is Madhurya aswadyash. You get to taste so much Madhurya, so much sweetness, and in the relationships with the Godhead. So it is not miserable. All right, that is the category of the jivas in whom the Aishwarya Shakti is not entered. But the other category of jivas in whom the Aishwarya Shakti has entered, he says they are also of two types. So one type is those in whom the Gyan Shakti is entered. This example is given, such as the four Kumaras. And then they're imbued with the Lord's Gyan Shakti. And so they have this enlightened awareness of the Godhead and of what is material nature. They are Leela avatars. And they're Leela avatars. Narada Muni is another one. He has Bhakti Shakti inside. Or Prithu Maharaj, he has Palana Shakti inside. So they have some Aishwarya Shakti Avishtam. They're basically avatars. And the other is, one is in whom the creative Shakti is entered, Shrishti Shakti. And the example, of course, is Lord Brahma. So he's one in whom the Shrishti Shakti is entered. Okay, the reason for all this discussion here, he just wants to say that Lord Brahma is Jiva Chaitanya. He is not Ishvara Chaitanya. Although he has great power because he is Jiva Chaitanya, who is Anavrita category, uncovered, and one in whom the Lord Shrishti Shakti is entered. So he's definitely not an ordinary living entity, but he is a living entity nonetheless. And therefore not in the category of Lord Shiva, who's Ishvara Chaitanya. That's basically the idea that he's conveying. All right, 2 more slides here. It's very short. Wait, is Shiva different or not different from Bhagavan? So here, this is an interesting little statement. Reading here, due to the similarity of Chaitanya, let's use the word ontological category, Vishnu and Shiva are non-different. That's what he's tried to establish. Devotees desiring nothing other than the Lord must discriminate between Vishnu and Shiva as worshipable or non-worshipable on the basis of nirguna and saguna character. So point is, if you're interested in Hari Bhajan, then devotees will not worship Shiva as such because he is having Maya Sparsha, right? He's touching Maya. So they accept that actually he's Ishvara Chaitanya. He is also a worshipable Lord. But because my bhajan is aiming towards the transcendence, which is Maya Sparsha Rahitam, so I'm worshiping that form which is related to that goal. So he says devotees will make this discernment in this particular way. Even if they shall be seen to worship Shiva or other forms seemingly related to the material nature, they will do so with the understanding that these are manifestations or extensions of the Lord, Paramatma Shakti, or Paramatma Anksha, and not that they are separate or independent and so on. So they will discern in this particular way. All right, continuing the sentence here. Due to non-similarity of Chaitanya, Vishnu and Brahma are different, right? Vishnu is Ishvara Chaitanya, Brahma is Jiva Chaitanya, so that he's already described. Sometimes Puranas describe the non-difference of Vishnu and Brahma. Yeah, what about that? This non-difference may be considered like the sun, like that of the sun in the Surya Kantamani, the stone empowered by the sunlight. So he's already made that point. Again, he's making it. In some Mahakalpas, even Shiva, just like Brahma, may be a Jiva who is empowered by the Lord. What? That's a change up. Shastra says sometimes a Jiva is also empowered as Shiva or Brahma. Shastra also says one who considers Lord Narayana, the supreme among the demigods, as equal to Brahma, Rudra, and other demigods is certainly an atheist. So I'm just going to highlight this one statement. When we recite the 10 offenses in the morning, they're basically, the way they've translated it is from this particular verse, which is coming in one of the Puranas. This verse says, one who considers Lord Narayana, the supreme among demigods, as equal to Brahma, Rudra, and other demigods is certainly an atheist. So the way that our translations go, if we, well, many of you probably didn't live in temples. Even if you did, I don't see many temples do this thing anymore where they recite the 10 offenses before chanting japa, which was like standard. Even when I joined, it was like standard thing that you did in the morning program. So the translation that we have is usually this type of translation. That's why devotees understand it in this way in our movement generally. That, oh, if you think the names of the devatas to be equal to Vishnu, that is the second aparad. Although now we're hearing the second aparad is a little bit different than how we normally hear it. But that translation is also warranted from this statement here. So Sri Vaishnava wants to reconcile this. So he says, this Shastric evidence will be considered proper when Shiva and Brahma are both in the category of imminent jivas. So here he's throwing in a curveball. He's saying in some shastras, it does give mention of a jiva who is imbued with a certain Aishwarya Shakti and does some work like the work of Shiva. So at that time, he's in the Jiva Chaitanya category. He's not in the Ishwara Chaitanya category. But a lot of times when you encounter shastric statements about Shiva, they're talking about Shiva in his Ishwara Chaitanya category. So the basic idea, summarizing here, is that if you consider Shiva to be in the Jiva Chaitanya category and you worship him as such, independent, then that is an offense. But if you see him to be as Ishwara Chaitanya, whose Ishwara Chaitanya position is derivative, and you worship him with that understanding, that is not an offense. So in this way, you have to be familiar with the tattva. Also, it is mentioned if a jiva does varnashram perfectly for 100 lifetimes, and what that means, who knows, then he becomes a Lord Brahma. But sometimes there isn't anyone to take the position of Lord Brahma, so the Supreme Lord himself will become Lord Brahma. In that case, then that Brahma is in the Ishwara Chaitanya category. He's not in the Jiva Chaitanya category. So all these little nuances of Shastra should be known. So this is the last slide here. Is that how do you nullify this aparad? So you have to know this tattva, otherwise you commit aparad. That's basically why he went through all this layered discussion on it. He says here, and this is the last thing, those who have not discussed these truths say, Vishnu is the only Lord, not Shiva. No, Shiva is the only Lord, not Vishnu. We are the sole devotees of Vishnu and we will not see Shiva. Or we are the sole devotees of Shiva, we will not see Vishnu. Their minds thus absorbed in arguments, they commit offense. If in time such offenders get the association of sadhus, expert in discussing all these truths, and are enlightened by them, they can also realize the non-difference of Shiva and the Lord. Then by doing Nam Kirtan, their aparad is nullified. So this is a nice place where Sri Vishnu is directly telling there's a relationship between our Sambandha Gyan and our ability to avoid aparad. Otherwise, by not knowing this tattva, so many nuances of tattva are there, and you don't know the nuances. And so you will perceive friends and enemies amongst the Vaishnavas because of it, and then you'll commit aparad. That's basically what he's saying. It's happening now also. And somehow this discussion about is bhakti inherent or not has flared up like a disease that was going down but wasn't completely abolished. Now it's flaring up again. And so now devotees are seeing friends and enemies in the greater Vaishnava Manda because of it. Because understanding these tattvas are extremely subtle, they're hard to understand, particularly when tattvas are related or come in contact with nature. For example, Shiva tattva having some relationship with Maya, the deity tattva, Archan tattva, they also have some relationship with Maya. And Dham tattva also having some relationship with Maya. Guru tattva also having some relationship with Maya. So these tattvas, specifically these four, they get a little tricky and subtle and hard to understand. And then you take a hard line with a particular understanding, and maybe you haven't really deeply reconciled all the nuances and subtleties in your mind. Maybe you believe that you have, but you maybe have not. And so in this way you perceive, oh, you say like this, then you are nonsense, and you make strong words and accusations, and you commit aparad. So this has been happening for years with Shiva Bhaktas, Krishna Bhaktas. They keep fighting with each other. Mostly, Maya is supreme. In other words, no, Maya is supreme. My understanding is supreme. And then this way you commit aparad. But if you hear from sadhus, they explain all these subtle tattvas, and that way you become reconciled within your mind, all these truths. And then you do Nam Kirtan with the proper Sambandha Gyan. Then your non-aparad will be nullified, this particular one. Otherwise, you keep on making it. All right, so that's it there with this particular topic. So it was a lot there. It's a kind of a tricky subject matter, but I did the best we could to break it down. Okay, so question, would Jiva Ananda be similar with Brahmananda? Not quite, because it is nothing but the I. Yeah, it's not dissimilar, let's say it like that. But it is a separate category, but it's not dissimilar. This is that Jivananda is very minute Ananda. And Brahmananda very great, right? Well, Brahman is everywhere. So a very great thing. And Jiva Ananda is a very small thing, because Jiva is Anu, so his Ananda must be Anu also. So his Anu is not strong enough to resist the attraction of the material energy. So the Brahmananda means when the Jiva identifies with Brahman. So then that Brahmananda comes, then he cannot be attracted to material energy. But the Jivananda very small, but they're not dissimilar, because there's only the I. So they're not dissimilar, but they are in slightly different, they're in different categories. Sham Gopi, you raised a great point about milk yogurt translation, that we accept the analogy, but don't accept the word vikara or transformation, because there is no transformation for the soul. It's only the body that goes over such transformation. Yeah, that is Jiva Goswami's comment there. So what exactly is transformed in Lord Shiva? Nothing. Also, as the verse goes, Vinna Pasha, seeing them different constitutes an offense. And I heard a devotee quoting this exact verse from Kadambini, but explaining it differently, that if we consider them different, i.e. Shiva inferior, we offend great devotees like Shiva, and that's why this offense comes right after Sadhu Ninda. Right, so that translation you can accept also, right? So different means you say Vishnu is Ishwara Chaitanya, and you're saying Shiva is Jiva Chaitanya. Because some Jivas also become Shiva. That's what Shiva Shna says at the end. So in our head, we're thinking, oh, Shiva is just some demigod. No, he's not some demigod. He's in the category of Ishvara. He's in the category basically of God. So if you see like that, and then you say, oh, he's just some demigod, and you become negligent or disrespectful, then offense. So you can say it like that also. But I am also so glad you explained what seeing them different actually means. Seeing them as two independent entities or as two absolute truths, yes. So you see, because in India, people who worship Shiva, they take him as independent Ishvara Chaitanya. So then they worship Shiva like that, then we say that is aparad, because his thing is derivative. He is not independent. Otherwise, that will lead to a fault of there being two absolute truths. How can there be two absolute truths? We're absolute, basically indicating one reality. Ishvara Chaitanya in two categories from Shiva is very crystal clear. Okay, cool. How is Jiva Chaitanya different from Shaktivesh avatar? So yeah, basically the same, that Jiva Chaitanya who's imbued with Aishwarya Shakti. So he's like a Vesh avatar. So they're the same. Prabhu, I'm sorry, I'm spaced out. When you explain the analogy of wood, fire, and smoke, and using that, you explain Brahma is not Ishvara Chaitanya, but Jiva Chaitanya. That was a lot. You know, these classes are recorded. You can always go back and hear them if you like, or fast forward it to that part. But just in short, what was being unpacked is how Lord Brahma is not in a superior category than Shiva. So if you take that analogy from the verse, smoke is superior to wood, but fire is superior to smoke. So Brahma, who's related to Rajagun, should by that analogy be superior to Shiva, who's related to the wood of Tamagun, so to speak, in the analogy. So they wanted to correct the misunderstanding that comes there by saying, actually, though, fire is in the wood, it is not in the smoke. So similarly, a subtle realization of God is in the Shiva, because he is Aishwarya Chaitanya, that's the point. And it is not there in Brahma. That was basically what was being explained there. In short, you can go back and hear it. Would considering Shiva a demigod be considered an aparad then? Well, yes and no. If he is Aishwarya Chaitanya, you consider him a devata, and as a result, you say, oh, he's just some devata, then that is an offense. Of course, you can avoid this sort of offense by respecting all the devatas also. That is actually one of the doorway angas of bhakti, right? Out of the first 20. And not like devotees are going out of their way to disrespect the devatas. If you respect them, then you can more or less avoid this aparad. But if you shall exalt them in a position that they're not, then that can lead to aparad. So that happens all the time, specifically in India. In America, we don't have this problem so much, because what we know about these realities is coming from Srila Prabhupada or from Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur or whoever. We don't have this whole cultural monolith surrounding us that would tell us that Shiva is supreme, or this one is supreme, and that one is supreme, and therefore not respect them properly in their right position. So we don't normally have this problem in the West, because whatever we know of the reality is coming from Acharya Vani. But generally, if he's respected as Ishra, Chaitanya, one in whom Ishra is there, then no aparad. So are you saying that the bliss felt is the same, but the magnitude of it is different? No, I mean, with these sorts of questions are so meta, because bliss is itself. How do we know what bliss is like? All we can say is a different category of bliss. Jivananda, Brahmananda, and there's Swarup Shakti Ananda. These are basically the three categories of bliss. Jivananda, Brahmananda, Swarup Shakti Ananda. So are we saying Jivananda is very minute, because the Jiva is minute? He's Anu, so his Ananda is Anu. And Brahmananda is very, Brahman is itself vast, unending. So Brahmananda is also very vast. But compared to a drop of water in the ocean of Swarup Shakti Ananda. But it is all bliss. So what is that bliss exactly? It is that which the words in the mind return without being able to precisely pinpoint. All you can say is the three categories, and it's very blissful. But one thing, the difference is there for sure in Jivananda and Brahmananda. The Jivananda is not enough to stop the Jivas from being attracted to the Maya energy, because it's very insignificant. And even that Ananda is described by Jiva Goswami as Dukkha Pratiyogi. So Dukkha Pratiyogi means the opposite of Dukkha, or basically devoid of misery. So it is very insignificant. That's what we want to say. Whereas Brahmananda is very significant. So if someone gets that Brahmananda, no question of attraction to material energy. But Swarup Shakti, Brahmananda is itself insignificant in relationship to Swarup Shakti Ananda. So then you will ask, well, what is the difference between, how am I supposed to explain that? It's a very subtle reality. First of all, we don't know what is bliss. Also, all we can do is accept the revelation describing it in this particular way, and trying to attract us to Swarup Shakti Ananda, trying to attract us to that bliss that is bhakti, by saying that Brahmananda is insignificant in relationship to this Bhakti Ananda, or Swarup Shakti Ananda. Oh, okay, I want the Bhakti Ananda then. But how you understand what is either actually, any of these categories? You can understand Jivananda to some degree when you have deep sleep. To some degree you understand. But we were just saying that they're not dissimilar because in it, there's only awareness, basically, without connection with content. So in that way, they're dissimilar. But what is the bliss felt? Who knows what is the bliss felt? No one can say. Wait, but even with being Ishvara Chaitanya, Shiva is not Vishnu Tattva, although is in God category. No, he's Shiva Tattva. He has his own category, but he's in the Ishvara, the general umbrella of Ishvara Chaitanya. So there's that. So we understand that Brahma is a post and can be occupied by anyone, right? But Shiva is not a post. Well, Sada Shiva. So there's Sada Shiva who is existing in the Paravyoma, in the spiritual sky. So he stays in Sada Shiva Loka, Sada Shiva Loka. When you can see they have made poster of the Brahmasamhita, the different realms of existence. And so they put one Shiva Dham in a place above the material sky, right? You've seen that, Paravyoma. It's there. So then this Shiva that associates with Maya Sparsha, is like an Amcha of that Sada Shiva. So he is related to the material modes of nature. And that Shiva, who is Rudra, it seems because Shiva Shnat's also quoting some verses here, that some Jiva can be elevated to such a position. So I don't understand it exactly like a post, but clearly, according to this, such a Jiva can be elevated to such a position. So there's that. It's occupied by the same person always, since Brahma is Jiva Chaitanya and Shiva is Ishvara Chaitanya. Yeah, so this Sada Shiva is there. He is one. But apparently it's Rudra. So there will be two Shivas? Yes, there are two Shivas. There's Sada Shiva and then there's Rudra Shiva. If you go to the third canto, there are 11 of them, right? The 11 Rudras that come out of Brahma's forehead. When the Kumaras, you say, no, Dad, we ain't gonna have kids. And Lord Brahma comes with him and say, hey, I need you to populate the world, make some kids. And they're like, nah, homie, we're going to Brahma. We want this liberation. We're not doing this program. And Brahma becomes infuriated, and out of his head, 11 Rudras come and they start destroying everything. And Brahma's like, hold up. It's too early. That comes at the end. Y'all need to chill out. This thing is coming there in the third canto. So 11 Rudras are there. So it can be so many Shivas. And Rudra Shiva, and then there's Sada Shiva though. So that's Sada Shiva one. So there will be two Shivas. What happens to the old one? Who knows? Okay, so that's all the things in the chat box that I'm answering there. Okay, I'm clearing up my understanding of the term. So Shiva has its own category, yes. Shiva Tattva, yes. But it's Ishvara Chaitanya because Ishvara is present. Ishvara just means a controller. That's all it means. Someone who is doing the controlling is called Ishvara. So like later on, if you go to 10th canto, chapter 33, at the end of the Ras Lila, so Parikshit Maharaj is asking this question, how the Lord can dance with other people's wives. So there he says that, well, the Lord is in the Ishvara category. So you should not imitate the Ishvaras even in your mind. And what's the example that he gives of an Ishvara that should not be imitated? Shiva. Shiva drinking the poison, what is it called? Kalakuta? Poison that came out of the milk ocean. Don't even imitate that in your mind, otherwise you'll be destroyed. So Ishvara is like a generic term. Even the Jiva sometimes is called as Ishvara, like in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, verse 8. He's called as the Ishvara. Sometimes there's a general category, but here it's just meaning a controller, someone who's having independence. So demigods like Durga are considered Ishvara Chaitanya. It depends, I suppose. I haven't thought that far ahead. Shiva Shakti Yukta Shashvat. The Shiva is always united with his Shakti. So Durga is like Shakti, so she will be also controlled by the Ishvara. I'll have to double check that, but that's my intuition on that. But some Jivas can become demigods, so those demigods are Jiva Chaitanya, yes. The word Chaitanya just means consciousness, that's all. Conscious being is called Chaitanya. Jiva Chaitanya, the Jivas who are conscious beings, and Aishwarya Chaitanya, the controllers who are conscious beings. And Chaitanya just means conscious beings here, that's all. Okie dokie, it's kind of 9:30, so I'm gonna stop here for now. You can ruminate on it and go and read up on it again. We'll continue on Monday because it's already the weekend. Hariyam Tassa, thanks a lot. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Surya Kantamani Ki Jai. Later. Hari Bol.